And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday early evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Now, here's a funny thing with today. So I'm wearing an Ali shirt. If you even dream of beating me, you better wake up and apologize. And I'm wearing the iconic Superman versus Muhammad Ali collector's comic cap that I got when I ordered the collector's comic through Amazon. But it is not, sad to say, well, not really, it is not going to be a boxing episode today. Yesterday marked, I should say, the 45th anniversary of the release date of a movie that it's a strange combination of stuff. So I'll just go in order. 45 years ago yesterday saw the release of Star Trek, the motion picture. The kind of follow-up to the TV series that if you ask the average person, how long do you think that OG Star Trek ran? 6 years, 7 years. The assumption is that it had a shit ton of episodes and was a huge hit for a number of years. No, it was only 3 seasons. Was it 79 episodes? I'm not sure the exact episode count, but it was 3 seasons. And by the 3rd season, they had slashed the budget to the point that we got episodes like Spock's Brain. I can't believe that was really an episode. It's kind of funny. But the TV series, although cerebral, although way ahead of its time, was not really as successful as you would imagine. And if I were to liken it to a more contemporary series that had an enormous cult following and was almost too good for TV, Twin Peaks, the David Lynch series, with his guy, Kyle MacLachlan from Blue Velvet. He worked with him on Twin Peaks. So Star Trek, the original series, was not that big of a hit. But after it was canceled, it did have a devoted following, if you want to call it a cult following, but it had a devoted following of fans. And Paramount, presumably the powers that be at Paramount, which was the parent company, they had an idea that maybe they could do something else. And the success of Star Wars in '77 really got everybody's motor revving to try to figure out, okay, we can definitely do something with Star Trek, because fan conventions had begun getting big showings and people were they were so excited and so into Star Trek that Paramount knew that there was something they could do. So they began working on a TV series. The proposed title was Star Trek Phase 2. Kind of logical, that would take off from the original, but then there were issues. Are they going to get Leonard Nimoy? Maybe he doesn't want to do it. And the other thing this is, again, a Generation X. I'm always kind of dating myself, using carbon-14 dating on myself. There was a really good animated series, which I think it went 2 seasons. Not sure about that either. But the animated series, they got all of the main actors to do the voices, and the animation was really good for the day. You compare the animation to that with the kind of classic Ralph Bakshi style of Spider-Man. Spider-Man does whatever a Spider, and that was psychedelic. The Star Trek animated series was straightforward animation and very, very impressive. Even the action sequences look better than a lot of other animated series of the day, or even more currently. So there was that other Star Trek out there in the universe. So they were talking about a Star Trek Phase 2. And then Jeffrey Katzenberg, the Jeffrey Katzenberg, of DreamWorks SKG. Jeffrey Katzenberg was involved in what was started off as Star Trek Phase 2. And then Paramount said, with the success of Star Wars, we already have a potential franchise here in Star Trek. And the gamble was that there were enough fans that were not the people who would go to Star Trek conventions, Trekkies or Trekkers of the day, but that there was enough broad support among general movie fans who maybe weren't obsessed with the TV show, but liked it. And if you said James T. Kirk, the average person, my dad never saw an episode of the TV series in its first run, but he knew who Mr. Spock was. He used to joke around it because there was a famous Benjamin Spock, the doctor, the prenatal care and postnatal care doctor, Benjamin Spock. That was Mr. Spock's brother. It was like a running gag with us. but the average film fan was at least aware. The gamble was, if we make a good movie, if we get everybody back and we tell a compelling story, we know the audience is going to come out for science fiction. And if there's an action component, they weren't going to make a Star Wars movie, but if the TV series had action, if you build it, they will come. And so they kind of shifted and said, let's just see if we can come up with a feature idea. And there were a lot of different concepts worked on. And Gene Roddenberry is a very interesting guy. He's a very interesting character historically. He came across as someone who was neurodivergent. Gene Roddenberry is quite clear to me was neurodivergent. He was one of those people who it appeared that he wasn't paying attention, but nothing ever got past him. He just seemed to be, if you'll forgive the pun, he always had his head in the clouds. Like he was literally, guy creates a TV series set in the clouds, and he was that sort of guy. He was like a space cadet. So some of Roddenberry's ideas for Star Trek the Motion Picture didn't seem that great at the time, but history has been kind to this movie. I'll get to that. So they went ahead, they come up with this idea, and it was not the movie that maybe a lot of people expected. It did not have the action element of some of the later sequels, for example. It was intellectual sci-fi. It was closer to 2001: A Space Odyssey than Star Wars. So that's part of the irony when Katzenberg, when they were kicking ideas around and they're like, well, we have our own potential franchise. You know, we just have to make a good movie. They didn't really make the movie that it seemed as if they wanted to. And part of it was that Roddenberry had a lot of creative input. That's something that changed in the sequel, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, where they brought on a fucking genius writer and a fine filmmaker in his own right, and Nicholas Meyer, professionally, to come up with the story. And Harvey Bennett, another guy. So they went away from Roddenberry, but Roddenberry was very involved in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And the film had the ironclad release date of December 8th, 1979. And this seems insane in 2024. But 45 years ago, everything was done by hand. The special effects had to be prepared a certain way. The film needed to hit theaters on December 8th. They had all the prints. They were trying to get together. They weren't able to finish all of the special effects. The prints, I mean, this is the kind of the joke. They used to say the prints were still wet. Not only were the prints still wet when they hit theaters, there were special effects shots that weren't completed. So audiences, critics seeing the movie, a couple of days ahead of time, and then audiences, if you were looking closely, there's a shot of, I think it's Kirk and Spock, and I don't know who else is in it. In the original version, it wasn't supposed to be, where they're walking on some kind of a bridge, and you say, well, it's not even completed. It looks like they're walking into nothingness, and that wasn't what they were trying to do. Now, another irony, even though the film hit theaters, it wasn't quite ready. They needed another couple of weeks to work on the special effects, but they weren't able to get there. They weren't able to get it there. So the film got mixed reviews from critics. There were some critics that loved the interplay between the leads, but there wasn't as much of that as there probably could have been. There was a little bit in the first act, but then when things start to go wrong and you meet the character of Ilea, the Persis Kambata, the late Persis Kambata, and Stephen Collins as Decker, the son of Commodore Decker in a famous episode, I think it was The Doomsday Machine. That's one of the best episodes of the original series, by the way, The Doomsday Machine. I would put it in the top 5. And the character of Decker, the Stephen Collins, the notorious Stephen Collins, his father was this Commodore Decker. So Kirk, there's a little bit of a father-son angle in the film. He's trying to help him. Like a lot of that stuff, it doesn't really work. But the character of Ilea is very interesting. It was well conceived. And Persis Kambata really sells it because her character, no spoilers if you haven't seen it, there's a lot of different permutations. There are different things that happen with that character as the story unfolds. It's all very interesting stuff. But movie got mixed reviews from critics. Here's the weird part that historically doesn't really add up. A lot of people who love Star Trek did not like the movie. They were disappointed. But the film made $139 million at the box office. That is a crazy gross for a movie that a lot of people said they didn't like. So what I'm saying, word of mouth was not as good as it could have been. It's not as good as, for example, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, which was a hit. When people saw it, they told everyone else, holy shit, this is the movie that Star Trek The Motion Picture should have been. So it was a huge hit, which at least guaranteed a sequel. And that's when Paramount and Katzenberg and everybody involved in this, they marginalized, they tried to be respectful, but Roddenberry was pushed off to the side. He had basically no input in Star Trek The Wrath of Khan. And it was, in that instance, to the movie's benefit that they let Nicholas Meyer and Harve Bennett, and Leonard Nimoy, and I'm sure the cast and Shatner had some input, but they let Meyer write the script. They let him drive the bus, as they say, and it worked out beautifully. Look, getting Ricardo Montalban was an absolute masterstroke. Con you bloodsucker. And Shatner is in good form. He and Montalban probably never worked together, but it feels like they're in the same room in some of the scenes of them taunting and just hectoring each other. Great stuff. Because when you have two talented people who have the tendency to overact and you put them in the same movie, man, if they're taking turns chewing scenery, unbelievable. But Star Trek The Motion Picture, it hit, it made all this money, the studio breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew they could do better in a sequel. Now, here's the New York University Film School graduate, trivia section of the episode. Star Trek The Motion Picture was directed by Robert Wise. The casual film fans, they may not know the name. Robert Wise worked on Citizen Kane. He edited Citizen Kane along with the writer, director, the iconic Orson Welles. Citizen Kane, to this day, many people consider to be the single most important movie in the history of cinema. 25-year-old Orson Welles figured out ways to optimize and maximize 1941 era technology. Along with his cinematographer, the ingenious Greg Toland, they figured out how to do things with the equipment of the day that other people probably hadn't even thought, well, can we push the envelope here? Never even thought to do it. So Robert Wise edited Citizen Kane. So you're talking about a legendary name just for that. But he also won an Oscar for West Side Story. Now, if I'm being honest, I prefer the Spielberg version. I think what Spielberg did in the 2021 West Side Story was just phenomenal. And I'm not even a guy that would normally go for that. When I think of Spielberg, I don't think, oh my God, he made a musical. But that was really good. In my opinion, it was better than the Robert Wise version. But in a similar vein to how when Warner Brothers made Superman the movie, which I was just talking about because of the Christopher Reeve documentary that I watched the other day, getting Marlon Brando brought a certain prestige and a certain gravitas to Superman the movie. Paramount having the pull to hire a guy like Robert Wise, an Oscar winner, and somebody who worked with Orson Welles, that added a lot of prestige to their project. It meant they were sending a message to critics and big movie fans, because the rank and file Star Trek fans didn't give a shit who directed the film. But if you go back in time, someone like me in 1979, I would have been impressed. Holy shit. I wouldn't have expected Robert Wise would take this. Quite frankly, I wouldn't expect him to take this gig, is what I would have said. But good on Paramount for getting already a legend like Robert Wise to take the gig. Now, you fast forward in time, and the Star Trek movies of the original six, Sinister Six, but the original six, the general idea is the even-numbered films are better than the odd-numbered films. I would agree with that up to a point, because there were some people that were so negative that they said all of the odd-numbered films suck. No, they don't. I don't think Star Trek 3 sucks. I don't think it sucks at all. It's not as good. Sorry for my little cat here. It's not as good as 2 or 4 or 6. I agree. But it doesn't mean it's weak. Those films happen to be, in my opinion, exceptional. And when DVD began to kind of gain more and more of a market share, circa 2000, 2001 era, it gave filmmakers more opportunity to revisit I don't want to say come out with director's cuts, but revisit films that they didn't get to make the film they wanted to make at the time for one reason or another. So, for example, James Cameron, he had his cut of The Abyss. The audiences didn't get to see it because Barry Diller and some of the other people at Fox, Rupert Murdoch, they basically said, you can't release a 3-hour film. This is a summer movie, Jim. What are you doing? This is incredible, but it's too long. Cut off, Amadeus. Just cut a few and it'll be perfect. So Cameron, for Laserdisc, was able to reconstruct and put back what he wanted and release his cut of The Abyss. He did the same thing with Terminator 2. And in this instance, Robert Wise, it always bothered him that he was not able to truly finish Star Trek the motion picture. He needed more time, not just on the special effects. There were certain elements of the film that he would have, there were other effect shots that were completed, but that could have been done better. And there were a number of moments in the film that he just wanted to get rid of. There's a couple of lines of dialogue where William Shatner's readings are bad, and they weren't necessary, and they almost take you out of the fiction because it's just like, what is he doing? That's not, what? So Robert Wise came out with what was called the Director's Edition. And it is so much better than, let's say, a VHS pressing or early DVD pressing of Star Trek the Motion Picture. It almost feels like a different movie, even though it's the same movie. It is a night and day difference. All of the effects work is better. There are certain shots that are infinitely better. The story simply seems to make more sense, and there's a little bit more character between the primary members of the cast. And it's a weird thing to say lucky, but I was lucky in the sense that because so many people had told me Star Trek the Motion Picture sucked, I had infinite opportunities either on HBO or Cinemax, years of seeing that it was airing, saying, you know what, I don't really feel like it. It's the kind of movie I really wanted to be into. And I had seen a few minutes here, a few minutes there, for years, but I had never watched more than like 5 minutes of Star Trek the Motion Picture at a time. And when I saw the DVD and Robert Wise talked about what he did with this director, I mean, he was already pretty old, but Wise passed in 2005. I think he was well into his 80s when he died. So he was probably around 80 when they let him put together this so-called Director's Edition. And the information about Katzenberg and Star Trek Phase 2 was on the DVD box set for Star Trek the Motion Picture. So my first time watching this film was Robert Wise's preferred cut, the Star Trek the Motion Picture, the Director's Edition. And I was fucking floored. This couldn't be the movie that I had been told by so many people, even big Star Trek fans. It's not good. Just watch Wrath of Khan again. Just watch Undiscovered Country again. Just watch Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home again. What about Search for Spock? Star Trek Search for Spock. Here's a trivia question. I had an opportunity to see Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in theaters. I was in Florida visiting my dad's parents. What do you want to see tonight, Junior? You want to see the Indiana Jones movie or do you want to see the Star Trek movie? I said Star Trek. Now, I like Star Trek The Search for Spock. But man, I had a chance to see Temple of Doom in theaters. I fucking blew it. 10-year-old me will never live that down. But Star Trek the Motion Picture, I think, is at least 3.5 stars out of 4. I would put it on par. If you ask me, like, overall, I don't think it's as good as Star Trek VI, which is a really great send-off for the full original cast. I know that Shatner appeared in, and I think Walter Koenig, in Star Trek Generations. But Star Trek Generations feels like a next generation. You know, I love Patrick Stewart. It feels like more that universe than the OG. The 6 Star Trek films, the only movie that I really don't like is Star Trek V. It was poorly conceived. The idea behind it, I understand what they were going for, but there had to be better Star Trek stories to make than that. Lawrence Luckenbill, what a great actor. He's fantastic as Sybok, Spock's half-brother. And there's a lot of real witty exchanges with the stars and making jokes and stuff like that. It's not good. The other 5 films, I rank either really good to almost perfect. With Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, just about like a 9.5 out of 10. But Star Trek the Motion Picture, I rank above Search for Spock and on par with The Voyage Home, which I really like. But what Star Trek the Motion Picture does so well is it makes you think. It makes you think. And people weren't expecting that from this. And when I say it makes you think, because it deals with advanced alien intelligence, if you will. It deals with the vast recesses of space. These are concepts that Star Wars doesn't really get into in the way that this film does. And the idea that you can have a being with limitless power to do what it wants. And that being still might be asking the same questions that humans ask. What am I doing here? What is my purpose? Is this all there is? And you're not expecting the wallop that hits you towards the end of the film when you realize what they're searching for. The Persis Kambata character keeps talking about this entity called V'ger. And we go the whole movie wondering, what the fuck is V'ger? It is to the credit of the filmmakers. It's not so much that they hold the surprise of what V'ger is, but when you realize what V'ger is, wow. And I don't know if audiences of the day were just so distressed because there were weird moments. Shatner's line readings were bad. The special effects, some of them didn't work. There's a strange sequence with Spock kind of floating through space because he's in some kind of almost a James Bond sort of a contraption where he's self-propelling. There's a lot of weird stuff, but it all works. It works because the film engages our minds, not just our senses. And it's something that audiences maybe weren't expecting at the time. They weren't expecting a 2001 kind of science fiction film with questions about what it means to be human. Is there that much of a difference if a being is wondering about its own existence? Is this all I am? Is this all I can ever be? What else is there? Really heavy stuff. And also, the musical score from Jerry Goldsmith, who I will maintain is top 5 greatest composers of all time. He's a peer of John Williams. Goldsmith's score for this film, they ended up using it in Star Trek The Next Generation, that da-da-da-da-da-da. I don't even think that score itself, that one track, is so great. He has a score in this film for Lieutenant Ilea, that's the Persis Kambata character. It is so beautiful. It is one of the most gorgeous pieces of film music. It's got to be in the top 10. It's in its own way, it's almost as impressive as John Williams' soaring Superman score or Star Wars. It's on par with, let's say, John Williams, some of his best work from Home Alone, which is really saying something. Because other than the most famous Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Superman, I would put Home Alone. It might be Williams' next best work. You look for Jerry Goldsmith, Ilea's theme. It's just, you can't even describe how beautiful it is, how perfect. And it doesn't even necessarily have to relate to the character of Ilea. It is just such an incredible track. And if you want to think of it in terms of, because there is a version of the movie which opens with presumably the Enterprise moving through the vast reaches of space, and it's that theme on the soundtrack. And if it's possible for a 3-minute musical interlude to sum up the beauty in the vastness of space, this one tune from Jerry Goldsmith hits it right on the head. It's fucking incredible. Absolutely incredible. So Star Trek the Motion Picture is available. I think, if I'm not mistaken, all of the Star Trek movies are on Paramount Plus because it is a Paramount property. You know, sometimes these things don't make sense, but other times, nail, meat, head, it's pretty obvious that if you have a movie made for HBO, well, where is it going to be? It's probably on Max. But Star Trek, over time, and some of the different series like Star Trek Deep Space Nine and I forgot the other one, the one with Kate Mulgrew. I don't remember the name of it. But it's been perhaps their biggest moneymaker going back to, well, really not so much the TV show, but going back to the movie, the first movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture 45 years ago. Now, it's just crazy it's that old. But it is a movie that if you've heard it's boring, It's not. It's slow, but not boring. It's methodical. And once you start to get into the meat of the story where you realize, okay, this is not going to be a conventional search and rescue. This is not going to be a conventional shoot 'em up. This isn't going to be a story of vengeance like Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. And to some extent, Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 5 kind of get into those themes. This is just a film of ideas, a film of really big ideas. And who better to usher us through a story with all of these big ideas than Admiral James T. Kirk, First Officer Spock, Chekhov, Sulu, Uhura, and Bones. Star Trek the Motion Picture, 45 years old yesterday. A terrific movie, much better than it was thought to be at the time. Thanks to the efforts of Robert Wise, the late great Oscar-winning filmmaker, for putting his film together for the fans to see the way he originally intended it to be. This has been episode 377 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Monday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.